Welcome to Trending Upward, and on today's podcast, we're going to look at how oftentimes a prophet is not going to have honor in his own country. Oftentimes, a prophet is not going to be accepted in his own country. Now, if this happened to Jesus, it can happen to you and I. In Mark chapter 6, we read, "And he went out from thence and came into his own country, and his disciples follow him. And when the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, From whence hath this man these things? And what wisdom is this which is given unto him, that even such mighty works are wrought by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph, and of Judah and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they were offended at him. But Jesus said unto them, A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house. And he could there do no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk, and healed them." We find, first off, in Mark chapter 6 and verse 1, "And he went out from thence, and came into his own country." It was in the heart of Jesus, and Jesus was in the will of God to go back to where he came from. You know, oftentimes it is also within our heart, but sometimes it's not in the will of God per se for us to go back to where we came from. But we find where Jesus here, it was within his heart, and it was within the will of God for him to go back to where he came from. And it says in verse 2, "And when the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished." You know, the word astonished means amazed, confounded with fear, surprise. We also see the word admiration. Now, what is astonishing to me is that even though they were astonished, there was something else that overshadowed their astonishment, which ultimately caused them to reject Jesus and his ministry there altogether. And what is it? It's that they knew him. They knew his family. At the end of the day, Jesus was unable to minister in the way that he desired to in his own country. And he went there, and even though they were astonished by what he had to say, they were offended by him. The word offense means displeased. Displeased means offended, disgusted. The word angry also comes up. So they went from astonishment to offense. And by the way, offense is a strong opposite to astonishment. Now we see further on down in verse 4, "But Jesus said unto them, A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house." So a prophet can go anywhere and everywhere at times and have honor. However, in his own country, among his own kin, and in his house, honor can be withheld from him. Matthew Poole tells us this: "Experience tells us that familiarity breeds contempt." You know, sometimes those who you think you should be able to be the most help to, because they're close friends, or maybe they're close family, or maybe you grew up with them, or in my case, maybe you served in the military with them, and you think that because you have all of this familiarity that you would be able to help them. But you know what? Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes you will not be able to help, and you will not be able to minister to those who are the closest to you. And this truly goes beyond human reasoning and human rationale, but it truly is the case, and it takes a certain degree of humility on the part of those who know us. Perhaps a child who grew up in your church, and now you're no longer the teacher. That child is the teacher, and now you are the student. That takes a certain amount of humility as those roles become reversed, as the student is now the teacher, or the son is now the teacher, or the daughter is now the teacher. It takes a certain amount of humility to be able to die to self and allow that reversal of role to take place. You see, I believe in part Jesus came back into his own country, and they said, "That's that little boy that used to live here. That's that young teenager. That's that young man that used to work carpentry with his dad, the son of Mary, is the brother of James and Joseph and of Judah and of Simon." And it says in verse 3, "Are not his sisters here with us?" And they were offended at him. Why? They could not handle this one-time little boy. They couldn't handle this one-time young man who once lived amongst them, who once worked amongst them. They could not handle this same young man coming back now with the authority, not that he didn't have the authority growing up, but having the authority of God upon him and through him in his earthly ministry. And it is sad to say, but because of the pride in the hearts of those within this country, they missed out on Jesus. You know, we got to be careful about this. We have to place truth at the premium of what it is, regardless of who says it, regardless of how close they are to us. You know, I have 5 sons, and you know what? There are times that my sons are right. And when they're right, then I have to place truth at the premium of what it is, because they're right. You know, there's still much that we can learn from children. Children grow up to be teens. Children grow up to be young adults. And if they're speaking truth, then we need to surrender to that truth. We need to submit to that truth and not be offended by them as the person. We find this oftentimes even amongst young preachers and young pastors. God will call a man to preach, and God will call a man to pastor, and he's a young preacher, he's a young pastor, he's a young missionary, and he gets into a church, and people sit in the pews, and they're astonished by his wisdom, and they're astonished by the words that comes from his mouth within the pulpit, but yet they are offended by his age. They are offended in the fact that someone who is 40 or 30 or 40 or 50 years younger than them is standing before them trying to minister to them. So they're astonished at the truth, but they're offended by the individual. Now, this is tragic, but we see this all over the country. And it happened to Jesus. It happened to Jesus in Mark 6. Don't think it will not happen to you and I. There will be those that we are closest to that we will be unable to effectively minister to.